I would like to thank all of you for joining us today for this highly enlightening session with the eminent Dr. Randeep Guleria, who's been face of COVID-19 for India and Indian government. Dr. Guleria, first of all, many thanks for joining us today and being with us today. The COVID-19 pandemic has led to a dramatic loss of human life worldwide and presents an unprecedented challenge to the public health, social life, and economy. The purpose of this webinar today is to share the best practices and lessons learned pertaining to diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of COVID-19 and the transition from pandemic to endemic. Moreover, the aim is to also raise mass awareness and to fight any misinformation around COVID-19. This webinar has been organized by the Cambridge University Bharatiya Society, a student society founded in June 2019 and dedicated to creating a homely atmosphere for Indian nationals studying and working in Cambridge in the UK. Through its publication and activities, the society aims to promote Indian culture, including philosophy, music, food, festivals, and its rich traditions. Once again, on behalf of the Cambridge University Bharatiya Society, I would like to thank you, Dr. Guleria, for being with us today. Over to you, Krishna.
Thank you, Dr. Varun. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Krishna Sharma, mentor and co-founder of Cambridge University Bharatiya Society, which Varun very nicely introduced. So as Varun mentioned, that we are all united here today for one purpose, which is to raise awareness and to clear up all the misinformation that has been spreading around COVID-19. And in order to be able to achieve that goal, each one of you participating here today carries an important responsibility to act as a catalyst for that change in the society that we are seeking, and making people around you aware of the right and wrong information relating to this virus. And to help us achieve that goal, we could not have asked for a better speaker than the very experienced doctor and director of the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Dr. Randeep Guleria himself. But before we proceed, I would like to say a few words about him. Dr. Guleria is a Padma Shri awardee and was the personal physician to Atal Bihari Vajpayee, former Prime Minister of India. He is credited with research on pulmonary diseases and has published around 36 book chapters and 268 articles. He is credited with the efforts in establishing a center for respiratory diseases and sleep medicine at AIIMS, which was the first in India. He is associated with the World Health Organization, WHO, as a member of its scientific advisory group of experts on immunization and influenza vaccination. In 2011, he was elected as a fellow of the prestigious National Academy of Medical Sciences. He's also a life member of Association of Physicians of India, Indian Chess Society, and the National College of Chess Physicians of India. Moreover, he also serves as a consultant to the International Atomic Energy Agency, Vienna, on issues related to radiation protection. Finally, Dr. Guleria has co-authored a book titled Till We Win, India's Fight Against the COVID-19 Pandemic. The book instantly became a bestseller and provides a unique blend of information on macro issues such as health policy, as well as micro issues such as how to stay safe during the pandemic period. And yeah, I mean, there are more things I could discuss, but in terms of limited time, I would like to say, Dr. Guleria, many thanks for taking out your time from your busy schedule and being with us today. And we very much appreciate that, and a very warm welcome to you. Dr. Guleria, if you have anything to say before we move on to the session.
Thank you very much. At the onset, I'd like to really thank both you, Krishnan, and Varun for inviting me, and the Cambridge University Bharatiya Society for organizing this webinar. My very best wishes to both of you and the entire society and all the Indians in Cambridge and also in the UK or other parts of the world, because all of us are going through a very challenging times, and it has been a challenging time for students, especially. As you've already mentioned, this pandemic has affected every state of society. And it's not only health, although the focus is a lot on health because that is the prime thing, but along with health, education, sports, economy, even social security and other things have all been affected because of the magnitude of this pandemic. And therefore, there is a need for us to understand how we can come out of this quickly, what we can do, what are the challenges that we have faced, and what are the lessons learned, and how do we move forward so that we are able to come back to a new normal where all those activities which have suffered, which, for example, education And there are students, even school children, who have got marginalized because there have been no schools for almost 2 years now. So how do we really get everything back on track? And that is the challenge that we face ahead. And there is a need for all of us to sit together, brainstorm, and find solutions and be innovative in terms of the future. But I'm really delighted to be here, and this is a challenging time. Once in a lifetime pandemic. I hope we don't have another pandemic in our lifetime. One is enough, but it has thrown up a lot of challenges because it was a novel virus which jumped species, developed the ability to have what we call sustained human to human spread. And these two factors, that is a virus to which mankind has no immunity, being a novel virus, and the ability of the virus to spread among humans quickly, to have human to human spread, makes it an ideal recipe for a pandemic to happen. This is what happened with COVID-19 in December of 2019. And rapidly this spread like wildfire across the world, causing a lot of misery and sorrows. And we saw that in India, both in the first wave and especially during the second wave. So a lot of lessons learned from the health sector, but even from other sectors. And I would be very happy to really answer questions or have an interaction in whatever way I can and provide whatever knowledge that I have and support that I can give. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Guleria, for your kind words, and very rightly put whatever you say. And before taking any further time, I would actually like to move on to our today's session. So basically, we have divided the session into 4 parts, today's Q&A session. And the 4 parts would be on COVID-19, some questions, and then some questions on vaccination, the second one, and then diagnostics, and then testing and treatment. So these questions are a combination of all of the questions that we received from the participants, and then the questions that we formulated. So starting with the first section, COVID-19, Dr. Guleria, as we saw, there was a sudden rise and decline of COVID-19 wave in India. This was during the second wave. And many people wonder if there is a third wave around the corner in India. And if there is, would it be as severe as the second wave? And are we better prepared to tackle it?
Yes, so multiple parts of this question. The first is the sudden rise and fall as far as the second wave was concerned. That is related to multiple factors. The second wave that really rose very quickly, we had up to 4 lakh cases a day. What really caught many people by surprise, especially the healthcare facilities, was the rate of rise of the second wave. The first wave rose rather slowly, but the second wave, the rise was almost vertical. And this led to a huge strain in the health infrastructure. And that was driven initially by the Alpha variant, which was first reported in the UK, and then subsequently by the Delta variant, which was reported in India. These were highly infectious, spread rapidly. And what we were seeing the year before, that is last year, was that in a family, if you had one person infected, maybe 2 or 3 would get infected. But with these new variants, everyone in the family was getting infected because they were highly infectious, and this led to the sudden rise. Subsequently, when measures came into place and large number of people got infected and there was some degree of immunity and there was a lockdown, containment zones were developed, the chain of transmission was stopped, and this led to the rapid decline in the number of cases which we saw. So the second wave rose sharply but came down also sharply, although it had a long tail, and for many weeks we continued to have almost 30 to 40,000 cases a day, and then it came down to 20,000, and now we are around 10,000 cases a day, which is much less than what we were seeing initially. There have been a lot of modeling which has been done regarding the third wave. IIT Delhi, there is another group known as Sutra, and then there is a group from the US, which has also tried to look at what the third wave could be, and it has varied a lot. ICMR has also done a modeling study. My own opinion is that we may not see that much of hospitalization as we saw in this first or second wave, because now with vaccination and immunity, there is good degree of protection. The sero-survey data, which was done in India and even in Delhi, showed that a large majority of Indians, or more than 70 to 80% of Indians who were tested in the sero-survey, had antibodies to COVID-19. What it means is that we have inherent degree of protection and therefore are protected from severe disease. And this would be the immunity would be across strains, and therefore even if a new variant came, it would give us some degree of protection. It is unlike what happened when the virus first came. Like I said in the beginning, that time it was a novel virus. We had no immunity. Now, since we have some degree of immunity in let's say humans, therefore we will not see that severe wave as we saw in the past. But we will continue to see cases, and this disease will become endemic like influenza or common cold, and therefore you will have cases happening for the coming years. I'm not saying it will not go away and totally disappear, but it will not be of the magnitude that we've seen in the past. So I think the third wave will not be as severe as the past. My own feeling is that with passing time, the chances of a severe third wave become less and less.
Thank you, Dr. Guleria. I see many participants asking this question: that will COVID stay around forever, and will life be ever like similar to the pre-COVID times as it used to be?
So I think it will happen, and I will just give you the example of the Spanish flu, the influenza pandemic, which happened in 1918 and 1919, more than 100 years ago. As a matter of fact, in 2018, I had written an editorial saying that 100 years after the Spanish flu, we are still not well prepared for another pandemic, not knowing that we would have a pandemic just a year or two later. But what we saw in that pandemic also was that about almost 1.5 to 2 years after the pandemic, and that time there was no vaccination. This is pre-antibiotic era. Only things that we had was what we call non-pharmacological methods, that is physical distancing, masking, and hand washing. After 2 years, it became endemic, and this is what will probably happen with COVID-19 also. There were few cases off and on, but not that much of hospitalizations. There was some hospitalization, especially in the elderly and those in whom immunity was low. But gradually, it became like a common flu. And we continue to have influenza now also during the winter months. And in India, we have it both in the monsoon months and in the winter months, but never of that severe intensity. And I think this is what is going to happen to COVID-19. It will develop some degree of seasonality and it will continue to be there, but cases will be much lesser, and we will sort of start living with it as we have done with flu in the past, and life will gradually come back to normal. As a matter of fact, if you go to various cities in Delhi, it doesn't seem that we are going through a pandemic. More or less, life has come back to normal. People have stopped wearing masks. There is no physical distancing, and both the metros and the malls are as crowded as ever before. So I would say we are coming back to normal, but a little bit of caution is still required.
Thanks, Dr. Guleria. So what do you think is the most appropriate time to impose a lockdown in any region in the event of a third wave in India? And as we have seen, a slight delay in doing that can actually lead to an unbreakable chain of events and like infections, and leading to a much severe issue, difficult to solve.
That's true. So I think the issue here is that sometimes what happens is that there is a delay among various, let's say, policymakers or implementers in getting a lockdown or area declared a containment zone and having aggressive actions. Multiple factors for that. So I think we have to look at various sort of defined parameters, which would say that if these are breached, then you will have to have a lockdown automatically rather than waiting for any permission. And one of them is looking at the positivity rate. If the positivity rate in a certain area goes above, the benchmark that we had taken was 5%. If it goes above 5%, you could take 3%, 4%. As a cutoff, it was taken as 5%. Then you must have a lockdown in that area. Similarly, if you are seeing a rising trend, now with few cases, we are seeing a positivity rate which has fallen to less than 1% in certain areas. So we can't really take that 5% as a benchmark because that may be too late. So I would say that if you see a rising trend, your weekly average shows that the cases are rising and the trend is on a rising side. So from 1%, it's gone to 2 or 3%. You must then start acting aggressively. And similarly, if you are seeing increased hospitalization, so sentinel surveillance of hospital admissions, if your hospital admissions start going up, if your positivity rate based on testing starts going up, then you must act and declare that area to be a containment zone, have a limited lockdown there. But along with that, build in strategies of testing, tracking, treating, and isolating those so that you can break the chain of transmission. Aggressive management strategies have to be put in place. So SOPs are there, implementation is required. And I think the cutoffs will vary depending on what is the positivity rate in that area. We had a positivity rate of 5% when we had a huge number of cases. Now with the cases coming down in certain areas, the cutoff may actually come down so that we pick it up early rather than late.
Thank you, Dr. Guleria. And over to you, Varun.
Many thanks, Krishna. Dr. Guleria, one of the important questions that everybody had on their mind was whether COVID-19 is airborne or not. So what is the final verdict on it? Thank you.
So initially when data came out, and this is more than a year ago, it was a droplet infection. So it's important for us to understand what is the difference between droplet infection and airborne infection. After all, both of them are in the environment. Droplet infections are those which occur due to droplets which are of larger size, 5 to 10 microns in size. If the droplets are of larger size and the virus is present in them, they can't stay in the air for a long time, they can't travel a larger distance, and they tend to drop to the surfaces. And that's why in the early days, there was a lot of focus on cleaning surfaces, washing hands, and sort of sanitizing a lot of areas because it was predominantly a droplet infection. Subsequently, research done in various labs showed that besides being a droplet infection, it can also be there in smaller particles, aerosols, which are less than 5 microns. Now, those aerosols which are less than 5 microns can stay suspended in the environment for a longer period of time and can also travel a little further as compared to what we were saying of 1 to 2 meters as far as droplet is concerned. Data suggests that it is both droplet and aerosol. You can always debate how much is droplet and how much is aerosol, but there is some degree of aerosol transmission. And the other important thing to remember is that when we start talking of aerosol transmission, then we are also looking at good cross ventilation so that in an indoor environment, you may feel that you are all alone and you can now remove your mask. But if there is no good cross ventilation and there is someone who has been there, let's say 5 minutes before you and has been coughing in that room and has left, then because of aerosol transmission, the virus may still remain suspended in the air for a longer period, unlike what we saw in droplet infection. So I think there is evidence that to some extent there can be aerosol transmission also, but predominantly it continues to be a droplet infection.
Thank you. And one other important question we had is, what is the possibility of reinfection after you've recovered from COVID-19? We did read in the news that people were infected twice or even thrice. So what are the chances of that happening? And when you're being reinfected, are you going to have severe symptoms or are they going to be milder symptoms?
So reinfection has been reported, and it is known that if once your immunity comes down, you may have a chance of getting the infection again. Also, since the virus also mutates, therefore the chances of your immunity waning to some extent because the new mutant is also there, and therefore reinfection can happen. There were reports of reinfection in the past also, and there was a lot of debate as to how should you define reinfection, because in many people the viral shedding can continue for weeks. So if you were to go by RT-PCR and your RT-PCR was positive even say 6 weeks later, then you may be just the same infection which is still there, and you're just shedding the virus, which is dead virus, and your RT-PCR is positive. Normally people take, for an ideal situation, you should do a gene sequencing and so that the previous infection and the current infection are of the gene sequence is different to classically define it as reinfection. But what we do normally take as a cutoff is around 90 to 100 days. So if you have the infection after 3 months, then it is usually taken as reinfection. Before that is possibly continuation of the same infection. But it can happen, especially in the elderly and those whose immunity is low, they have a higher chance of reinfection. Majority of people, as far as the data is concerned, tend to have a milder infection when they get reinfected because they have, let's say, some degree of immunity as far as the infection is concerned. However, to be very honest, I've read some reports, especially from the US, where the second infection was a little bit more severe as compared to the first. So we still need more data, but majority of people who have had COVID in the past tend to have a milder infection as a part of reinfection.
Thank you. Also, there were a lot of information about some groups being at high risk of severe COVID-19 illnesses, among them being elderly people, children, and people suffering from specific diseases. Could you please throw some light on people who are at high risk of COVID-19? Thank you.
Yes, so there is now data which is clear-cut, which shows that one of the most important risk factors is your age. And the elderly are at much higher risk. As a matter of fact, if you look at the mortality of people less than 50 years, it is actually very low. I think it's even less than 1%. But as you go to people over the age of 70, the mortality goes up to almost 8 to 10%. So with age, the chances of having more severe infection is higher. And that's why in all areas where vaccination was started, the first focus along with healthcare workers were the elderly population, because they had a higher mortality. And we saw that in Italy, in Spain, even in the UK, in various old age homes, that a higher mortality happened, especially during the first wave, because of the fact that many of the elderly got infected and had very severe disease. The second risk factor that has been looked at is those with comorbidities. So any comorbidity, which means you have a chronic respiratory disease, you have underlying heart disease, or if you have your immunity is low because you're on chemotherapy or on some drugs like steroids which decrease your immunity, then the chances of severe infection goes up. And that is why those were the group where vaccination was also focused on. So these are the high risk group, the elderly and those with comorbidities. Interestingly, also what has been shown is that if you look at the gender, men seem to have more severe disease as compared to women. And it's said to be more based on hormones and other things. But that if you look at hospital admissions, there seems to be more men who get admitted with severe illness as compared to women.
Thank you. Also, we did see the sudden rise and decline of black fungus. Could you please explain why that happened? What was the cause of black fungus? Thank you.
So black fungus is what we call mucormycosis. It's a fungal infection which classically has been there in the past. There were some reports even during the first wave, and it affects basically either the sinuses, what we call rhinocerebral orbital mucormycosis, that is the nose, the sinuses, and then it can go into your orbit, that is the around your eye, and sometime into the brain. Along with that, it leads to what we call pulmonary mucormycosis. It can also affect the lung itself. Now, the chances of mucormycosis are higher if in people who have underlying diabetes or who are on steroids. And this is a very deadly combination, because if you're on steroids, your sugars become high because of the steroids that you're taking. And if you have high blood sugars, then it predisposes to developing mucor infection. We used to see that in the past also in diabetics, so, but it was not that common. But in the second wave, because of the panic that happened, very high dose steroids were given even in mild cases when it was not required. And this led to a lot of people, sugars going haywire and getting steroids for a long period of time. And opportunistic infection, this is an opportunistic infection. Opportunistic fungal infection started happening. This is a fungus which otherwise can normally be present in the nose and throat, but doesn't cause infection because the immunity is good enough and it doesn't allow the fungus to multiply and grow. But when your immunity is low and your sugars are high, the fungus gets sort of a hold in the sinuses, in the nose, and in the lung, and that leads to the infection. This led to mucormycosis, which is a misnomer. It's not black in color, but that's this. Once the fungus starts affecting the area, then that area's blood supply becomes less, and that area starts looking blackish, and that's how it got the name black fungus. But mucormycosis is not actually a black fungus. Black fungus is another family of fungi, but it did cause a large number of cases. And then once people realized that this is happening, and there were more judicious use of steroids and aggressive treatment, and even COVID came down in terms of the cases, we saw a decline in the cases of mucormycosis.
Many thanks, Dr. Guleria. Now we'll be discussing the vaccination bit of COVID-19. Over to you, Krishna. Thank you.
Thank you, Varun. So Dr. Guleria, actually, now there are, more than one vaccine options available in India and worldwide. And there is a lot of debate among people which vaccine they should use. And basically, if you can comment on the vaccines that are currently being used in India and their efficacy and any side effects such as blood clots, which could be associated with each one of them. And there is a follow-up question on that by one of the participants. It's if there are any different types of side effects or adverse reactions for different vaccines. And for example, is upset stomach a side effect of post-COVID issue? Yeah.
Okay, so this is a very unique situation that for one virus, we have so many vaccines that have been developed. As a matter of fact, even now, more than 60 vaccine candidates are undergoing clinical trial. So, and there are more than 150 vaccine preclinical studies going on to look at vaccines. So just for one virus, there have been so many vaccines tried, which are being tried. As far as vaccines are concerned, I'll just briefly try and give you an idea of what is the difference. The vaccine, basically three things we need to understand when we look at a vaccine. One is the antigen, something which stimulates the body to produce antibodies. So that is what is used as the spike protein or part of the spike protein, which is the layer outside the virus, which gives the antigenic stimulus to the body to produce antibodies. Then the second is the platform. How do you get this antigen into the body? And that is the platform, and there are various types of platform, the mRNA platform, the viral vector platform, which is what the AstraZeneca does or the Sputnik does, which uses a viral vector. Or you have what we call the inactivated virus, which is what the Bharat Biotech has. The virus is inactivated, and that stimulates to produce the antigen. You may have a live inactivated and a dead virus, which is given as an antigen stimulation. Then you have what we call the protein of the virus-like proteins, which can also be used to stimulate the production of antibodies. The third part is the delivery. How do you deliver it? So by and large, most vaccines are given by the intramuscular route, but you can have a delivery which could be a nasal spray, which goes into the nasal mucosa and also gives good nasal immunity. The Zydus Cadila vaccine has a subcutaneous injector. So it's not an intramuscular route, and it therefore doesn't cause pain because it's just, there's no needles prick per se, it's just a subcutaneous. So different delivery devices are also there. So all vaccines use these three broad platforms, these three mechanisms with different platforms. India, we have in a very unique situation because India has multiple vaccines which are currently being looked at. We have the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is being made by the Serum Institute of India, which is viral vector vaccine. The virus is a chimpanzee adenovirus, which is used as a vector, and the antigen is part of the spike protein. Then we have the Bharat Biotech, which is an Indian-made vaccine, which is a whole virus inactivated vaccine, where the whole virus is inactivated and then used to stimulate the antibody production. We also have Sputnik available in our country, which is also a viral vector vaccine from Russia. Along with that, there is the Johnson vaccine has also been approved in India, so has Pfizer. But India itself is also doing a lot of research, and Zydus Cadila, which is an Indian-based company, has come out with the first DNA plasmid vaccine, which is also a vaccine which is using the same technology as the mRNA vaccine. And this is a DNA plasmid vaccine, which is available. It has to be given in 3 shots, and this is also being given regulatory approval. This is the first DNA vaccine in the world made by an Indian company. Then we have another company, Biologically, which is making an mRNA vaccine which can be kept from 2 to 8 degrees centigrade, so at room temperature or in a normal fridge. And that should also be out by the end of the year. And then we also have a viral-like particle vaccine, which is also being made by a company called Genova. So these are companies which are tying up with various research institutes, and these vaccines should be available. So to some extent, one gets spoiled for choice, and then one starts wondering, should I take A, should I take B, or should I take C? What I would say is that as of now, all vaccines are effective against severe disease, against hospitalization, against death. And therefore, there's really not much to choose from, and you should take whatever vaccine you're able to get. Because currently, we still, if you look at the global situation, we still are in a situation where we would say there is still vaccine shortage rather than vaccine surplus. The whole continent of Africa, only about 5% of the whole people in Africa have got the vaccine. So we should just take whatever vaccine is available to us. we will have more data which will emerge over time, which will allow us to get an idea of whether a homologous or a heterologous vaccine is better, meaning that you should take the same vaccine as your prime and your booster, the first and the second shot, or whether you should mix and match. And there is data which has emerged now both from Europe, from UK, and even from India, where for various reasons, and even from Scandinavia for that matter, for various reasons, there was a mix and match of the vaccine. The first dose was the AstraZeneca, but because it was stopped because of some side effects or some regulatory issues, second dose became the mRNA vaccine. Data suggests that mixing and matching may give you more immunity. It has a better immune response. It causes a little bit of higher reactogenicity. What does that mean? That means that you may have a little bit more of the local side effects, fever, body aches, pain at the site of injection, but your immune response is better because you're using two different platforms to stimulate the antibody production. Therefore, I think what we are currently seeing is a large number of vaccines coming into the market. We will need to have more data as to say which is better for a particular group. It's possible that you may say that for children, this is better, for the elderly, this gives better immunity, and for those with comorbidities, this will give better immunity, and we may evolve into vaccine strategies for different subsets. But currently, we don't have enough data as far as that is concerned. Also, we may have a situation where we may have what we call the next generation vaccines, which will cover for the new variants. All the vaccines are covering from the traditional Wuhan variant, but now we have the Delta variant, we have the Alpha and the Beta variant. So we may have vaccines which cover for these variants. And like we have in influenza, we may have a bivalent, trivalent, or quadrivalent vaccine. What does that mean? That means in the same vaccine shot, you could have two variants being covered. So you could have a vaccine which covers the Delta variant and it covers, let's say, the Beta variant, because these are the two variants which have a higher chance of mutating and becoming more infectious. So you may have a bivalent vaccine which covers for two strains. And I see that in the near future, we may have vaccines of that type as far as the next generation vaccines are concerned. Currently, whatever vaccine you're able to get, I think you should take it because there is good amount of data as far as efficacy is concerned. Regarding safety, some data which emerged, especially from the AstraZeneca vaccine and even for the Janssen vaccine, that it may lead to a higher chance of blood clotting and clot formation, especially in certain age groups. But again, regulators, when they've looked at it, it's very rare, and the risk-benefit analysis suggests that the benefits far way outweigh the risk, and therefore these vaccines are also safe. And now with over 2 to 3 billion people having taken the vaccine, I think we should be confident that vaccines are safe.
Thanks, Dr. Guleria. You've actually already touched upon my following two questions from this point onwards, but I'll just ask the remaining bits. So basically, my following question would have been, obviously, the Delta plus variants. We have seen how rapidly they spread, and we understand that the virus is continuously evolving. So the worry among the public is that the new virus mutations expected to be even deadlier. And how does it in general impact the vaccination development process?
So I'll just add on to what I said, because two things are very important to understand. One is what are we looking at when we vaccinate people? Now, what we're looking at is to prevent disease. That is, you don't want people to get severe disease, which leads to hospitalization, leads to ICU admission, leads to death. Vaccines, as of now, even with the new variants, are holding out. And although we're seeing in certain parts of the world a surge in number of cases, we're not seeing a similar surge in the number of hospitalization, because vaccines there are protecting people from getting severe disease. But vaccines are not protecting that much from infection. So if you have taken the vaccine, you may still get COVID-19, you may still have breakthrough infection, your RT-PCR would be positive. But because of the vaccination, you will not get severe disease, and you may get a mild disease, or you may get asymptomatic infection. So you may continue to transmit the disease, and you may have increase in number of cases, but hospitalization will not happen. So currently the vaccines are still holding out as far as severe disease protection is concerned. And that is a very good sign, because we're not seeing a surge in hospitalizations as we were seeing in the first or the second wave, where we had people running out of oxygen, hospitals running out of beds or ICU beds. So although cases are rising even in Europe, that type of scenario is not happening. And I think that that is how things will be in the future. You will have cases, but mild cases, but a lot depends on how the virus behaves. Now, the natural tendency of the virus would be to become a disease which spreads but doesn't cause high fatality. Because if the virus kills the host, then the virus will not be able to spread. So it is a normal evolution that the virus would try and develop a milder disease, but it is very unpredictable. And that is the only unknown factor as far as the future is concerned. But if the virus continues to behave like it is behaving now, then I think we are in a better position in terms of vaccination. But if it changes, then we will have to change our vaccine strategy and come out with newer vaccines which cover the more virulent strains which may emerge. Currently, that doesn't seem to be happening.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Guleria. So my following question, you also already briefly touched upon. So it was basically about the recent research done by the Oxford team, which was that the alternating doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca and Pfizer vaccines can actually produce a stronger immune response, as you pointed out. And the question is, will the order of administration matter depending on which one you take first and which of the two vaccines you take? And will this happen in India so that can allow greater flexibility in terms of the vaccine rollout?
So two things. One is, of course, the order does matter to some extent. And some data did suggest that if you took the AstraZeneca vaccine first and then later on the mRNA vaccine, your immune response was much better than the other way around. So the order will depend, and we need more research for that. In India, we, as a policy, it is not happening, but it has happened inadvertently for some patients who initially got one vaccine. They got the Covishield, and subsequently, because of a mix-up, got Covaxin. So they had got a different vaccine subsequently in one place. The data was analyzed, and it was found that the safety was good. And again, the immunity was better than if it was given as the same vaccine. But currently, as a policy, that has not happened. It will evolve over a period of time because it has to be then developed into a strategy when you're looking at it as a public health strategy. You have to have sufficient doses of both the vaccines. You have to have the vaccinators trained in doing that. Currently, the policy is to follow what you gave as the first dose and the second dose. But it may change with time. But currently, I don't see that happening in the very near future.
Okay, thank you. Over to you, Varun.
Many thanks, Krishna. Dr. Guleria, I have questions around how long does the immunity last from vaccination? Initially, when the vaccination was given, the interval between two doses was around 28 days. Then it was extended to 3 months. And there was some research reporting that one could wait about 10 months, which would actually help in sort of increasing the longevity of the immunity. So could you please throw some light on it? Like what is the ideal sort of, and would we actually require booster doses? Recently, WHO has commented on it and said it's like a large scam. So your thoughts would be really nice on it. Okay,
so the first part is that the data is different from different vaccines. So for the Bharat Biotech vaccine, Covaxin, the policy is to give the second shot after 28 days, and there's nothing in that to suggest that we should delay it. For the AstraZeneca vaccine, the data that emerged because of trials which by chance had the second dose got delayed because it was not available, showed that it was causing a better immune response. And then some studies also came up which suggest that if you delay for the viral vector vaccine, if you delay the first dose and the second dose by even a few months, and like you said, even up to 6 to 8 to 10 months, then the immune response is better. And therefore, you may get a better immune response. But the issue is that the longer you delay it, the longer period interval that you have where you have given a person partial protection. And that is where the trade-off happens. And therefore, a cutoff of around 12 weeks was the thing that is safe enough. But the longer you delay the AstraZeneca vaccine, data suggests the better the immune response. Coming to the booster dose. Now, there are 3 or 4 things that I would just like to mention. One is the data, the science behind it. The science behind it doesn't really support that we need to really give a booster dose to everyone. There are certain subsets, the immunosuppressed people whose immune response is less, they don't form enough antibodies or immune response. And to give them, I won't call it a booster dose, it's basically a dose to enhance their immune response, because they were not getting a good immune response when the first or the second shot was given. So in them, you may argue that they may benefit from a booster dose, but should everyone take it? Currently, if you look at the data, and I just mentioned that there are people, even in the UK, who got the vaccine in December or in January. Until now, we are not seeing increased hospitalization, increased deaths. That means the vaccines are holding out even with the new strain. And therefore, the indication for booster dose does not seem to be there. Second is the ethical part. We know that there is a large part of the global community which has not been vaccinated at all. And they are not only more prone to getting the infection, but they're also more prone to leading to more mutants developing. If you have an area where you get more and more infection and the viral replication goes on more in that area, the chance of mutation also increases. More the viral replication, more the copies made, the more the errors that happen when the copies are made, and the more the mutation that will happen. So there is a need to vaccinate everyone as early as possible rather than going for a booster dose where the science is not that strong. That's what the WHO is trying to say, that they would like that instead of giving a booster dose, the vaccine should be given to those parts of the world where even people have not got a single dose, so that there is more protection. Because as has been said, no one is safe until everyone is safe. And that is what we need to push for. I'm not saying you will not need a booster dose. You may need a booster dose, but it's not the right time right now. You may need it next year. And we may need a different shot for the booster. Should it be a different vaccine? Should it be, what should be the booster dose is also not clear. For example, should I now take, I've taken Covaxin. Should I take Covishield as the booster dose? Or should I take the Pfizer shot as a booster dose? Will that give me better protection? We don't have enough data for that. So we need to really get that data in as early as possible. At the same time, monitor and do close surveillance as to see whether a booster is required. If we have high-risk groups which need to be given a booster because of their immunity coming down, then they can be considered. But giving booster to everyone currently, I don't think is the right strategy.
Thank you. Also, we did actually see a lot of delay in WHO approval for Covishield and Covaxin. Is it mainly because there was not enough data for WHO to give them approval, or was there some other reason behind it?
So this is a question which WHO can answer. It's difficult for me to answer that. But I think the regulators and especially WHO needed more and more data. The data was there, and we've now, from our own institute, looked at data which is not industry sponsored, but looking at our own healthcare workers. And one of the articles should be out in the Lancet tonight. And we have another article which should come out in JAMA. So a lot of research has been done looking at the Indian vaccine in our own setup, which is not industry sponsored, but done by research institutes, showing that the vaccine is efficacious and effective and safe. But it takes regulators and have their own sort of guidelines and other issues. So I'm not really sure, but I think in my mind, the approval should have come earlier than what it has happened right now.
Thank you, Dr. Guleria. Over to you, Krishna.
Thanks, Varun. Dr. Guleria, there are concerns surrounding the safety of vaccines. So there is this question whether vaccines are safe for pregnant women, children, and people on immunosuppressants. And I just came across this question in the text in the chat box by someone, Kanika, that after vaccination, there are recent reports on new thyroid patients having been increased. So if you have any comments on this question.
So whatever data we have, and this is of course based on, remember this is just a virus or vaccine which is less than 2 years old, and vaccines are less than a year into the trial. The first vaccines came out last year in December. So whatever data we have in terms of short-term safety data is very good and suggests that these vaccines are safe. There are certain subsets where we need more data. One was in pregnancy, and that was something that was looked at closely. But the data suggests that if you look at the risk-benefit analysis, the benefit is much more than whatever little risk there may be of the vaccine, especially because we know now that in pregnant women, there is a higher chance of developing severe COVID, and it can affect the fetus and also lead to preterm labor. And therefore, that is something that is also needs to be kept in mind. There will always be issues about certain ethnic groups which are not studied in trials and then can come up with some side effects which are not seen. That will evolve over a period of time. So I'm not saying that the vaccines are totally safe. We will need to have very close monitoring for any side effects as we go ahead vaccinating more and more people. But currently, considering the severity of disease, I would suggest that the data is more in favor of getting the vaccine with very few or acceptable side effects. Long-term side effects is something that only time will tell. So do we have, especially when the decision comes on children, do we have data that they are safe and have no long-term side effects in young kids? I think we need more data for that. But again, as of now, whatever data is there suggests that they're safe, and the risk-benefit analysis suggests that the benefits far outweigh this low risk that may be there. Most vaccines, the side effects that we see are in the first few weeks or months, and that data is very robust to suggest that they are good, safe as far as that is concerned. Some side effects have been reported, but a cause and effect relationship has to be established. And I think that including the thyroid issues and other issues regarding various other side effects which have been reported. Currently, we don't have enough data to say that this is definitely an effect of the vaccine.
Thank you, Dr. Guleria. And can we be certain from the sero-survey results that children between the age group of 6 to 18 would not have serious COVID-19 complications in the future predicted wave in India?
So the sero-survey data suggests that majority of children, more than 60 to 70%, have already had COVID-19 and they've had mild disease and have recovered from it. So that is a very heartening factor. What we've seen in our hospital is that admissions in children are usually those who have comorbidities, obese children, children who are on steroids or whose immunity is low. Those are the ones who are getting admitted. Healthy children usually were all right and were recovered at home, and we didn't really need to admit them. Home isolation and mild disease was all that we saw. Having said that, no one can predict how the virus will behave, but it's unlikely that the virus will change and suddenly have a predilection for children. So I think that we can be confident that children will continue to have mild disease, and we need to be prepared in case there is more severe illness in children, but it seems to be less likely.
Thanks, Dr. Guleria. I have one more before I pass it to Varun. This question is quite a general one. I've heard from people that is it okay to be vaccinated while being positive? So while, let's say, if they are unaware of the fact that they were positive and if they get vaccinated, and also how long should one wait after testing negative to be vaccinated?
So obviously, if you don't know you're asymptomatic and you are having COVID-19, you could get vaccinated. There is no data to suggest that it can be harmful or it can lead to worsening of your COVID infection. But if you are symptomatic, you have fever, cough and cold, sore throat or symptoms which suggest COVID, then of course you should get yourself tested. And then if you're positive, then obviously not get vaccinated and wait till you become negative. Initially, we were saying that you could get vaccinated even 2 to 3 weeks after you have become negative. Current guidelines suggest 3 months because it gives you 3 months. Once you have COVID, you get your natural immunity also. So if you have natural immunity, you could wait for a few months and then take your vaccine, which will then last for a much longer period of time. So current guidelines usually say that wait for 3 months, 3 months protection you already have. And after 3 months, take your vaccination, which will then give you protection even for a longer period. So currently our guidelines suggest that you can get your vaccination after 3 months.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Guleria. Over to you, Varun.
Thank you, Dr. Guleria. So I have a question on India's vaccination target. So India's vaccination program is the fastest and the largest vaccination program in the world. So when is India expected to achieve its vaccination targets, both for the first dose as well as the second? And how far are we from the herd immunity? If you could comment on that, that would be great.
So I think we are moving rapidly as far as India's vaccination is concerned. Now, like I mentioned, with more and more manufacturers coming in, we are quite confident that by the end of the year, we will have at least the entire adult population would have got one dose at least, and almost 40 to 50% of people would have got the second dose. Some people, obviously, because the duration of the AstraZeneca vaccine, the second shot is 12 weeks apart, you'll have to wait for 12 weeks or 84 days till they get the second shot. And therefore, that will happen somewhere early next year. But I think we're on target as far as the adult population is concerned, and gradually it would open up to children also in prioritizing first the high-risk group and then to everyone. That will really help in controlling the disease in our country, and that has gone a long way in preventing further increase in the number of cases. Coming to the question of herd immunity, herd immunity would happen if a large number of people have antibodies either due to natural infection or because of vaccination. But it is also dependent on the fact that the virus remains the same. If the virus mutates and changes, then the whole concept of herd immunity is not there, because now you are looking at immunity against a new variant for which your immunity may not be as high as it was in the past. Therefore, the concept of herd immunity would be there. So if you say, do we have herd immunity against the, let's say, the Wuhan strain, the first strain? Majority of us have herd immunity against the Wuhan strain, but the Delta variant has changed that, and Delta Plus will change that. So like we see in flu, we get influenza every year, but many of us have developed antibodies, but we never achieve a situation where we say no one will get influenza because the virus keeps changing. So as the virus mutates, there will be cases that will happen. And therefore, I don't think that we will ever have a classical herd immunity. We will get protection in terms of severe disease, but the virus will become endemic and we will continue to have cases to some extent.
Thank you. Over to you, Krishna.
Thanks, Varun. Dr. Guleria, we just have a few more left, so hopefully we'll be quick. So basically, the next question I have is, I was just watching the news yesterday, and then it was very disappointing to see that many people in India are still not considering taking the vaccine, and they think that they will actually die if they take the vaccine. So the question is, how can we urge people to get vaccinated, especially in the rural and peri-urban areas where there is a lot of hesitancy against vaccination due to misinformation?
So that's true. We are, although it's come down significantly, but we are also facing what we call an infodemic where we are having to counteract a lot of, let's say, information through social media and other platforms, creating a fear psychosis in a number of people who should get themselves vaccinated. I see that every day in my OPD. Patients tell me that, no, my lungs are weak. If I take the vaccine, I may not be able to tolerate it. Or their children telling them that you are too old and you may not be able to take the vaccine. And I have to convince them that you are the high risk group. You have to get yourself vaccinated. So I think it's talking to people, making them aware. And I think a lot of us as healthcare workers can really work in that direction. And we're trying to do that to a large extent. Also, there is another issue that has come up and which I've noticed is that some people who have taken the first dose are not coming forward for the second dose, saying now COVID has come down. We have not seen COVID in India and therefore it's now over. So why should I take the second dose? Here again, it's something that we have to explain to people that you are only protected unless you take both the doses, and one dose is not enough. And therefore, when your turn comes for the second dose, you must come forward and take the second dose. So these are the two types of challenges that we're seeing. There is now a whole policy which has been pushed by the Honorable Prime Minister and the Government of India of going house to house and convincing people and giving vaccination at home. And that has started in rural India, that they're knocking on everyone's door and finding out if there's anyone who's not been vaccinating, talking to them and getting them vaccinated so as to overcome this issue of vaccine hesitancy. It is working, and it seems that with that, we should be able to achieve our target by the end of the year.
Thank you, Dr. Guleria. So we'll move on to the next two sections, for which we have one question each. So diagnostic and testing section next, which, so the question is basically how, so can home or self-testing be successful in India? And is India conducting enough diagnostic tests daily?
So the home testing is what is known as the rapid antigen test, which is a kit available. It is now marketed in India. You can buy it off the shelf. It's available and it tells you how to do your test at home. But it's important that people understand how to take a swab properly. A lot depends that you take a good nasal or an oral swab. But if you can do it, it is possible. And a lot of healthcare workers are taught. And so they do it for the patient by going to their house. And in rural India, ASHA workers or others are taught how to do the testing. India had a challenge because when the pandemic started, there were very few labs which were doing testing for COVID-19, the RT-PCR testing. We worked aggressively, talking to a lot of medical colleges, both in the private sector, government sector. We roped in a lot of veterinary institutes and other institutes which had RT-PCR testing capacity. And from a handful now, we have almost 2,800 labs. And we're doing more than 2 million tests a day. So we are now doing a lot of testing, and this is something we need to sustain, because as cases come down, there is a little bit of a decrease in the number of testing. I think it's important that we continue to test, because that's the way that we'll be able to pick up any increase in the number of cases. So testing has to continue, but I think we have now enough labs which are having the capacity both in the government sector and the private sector to test, and we can even ramp it up further.
Thank you, Dr. Guleria. Over to you, Varun.
Thank you. So a discussion on COVID-19 is incomplete with our discussion on oxygen, which is an essential medicine for the treatment. So Dr. Guleria, with the procurement of thousands and thousands or even in lakhs procurement of cylinders and concentrators and installation of LMO tanks and PSAs across the countries in different hospitals, from district hospitals to civil hospitals to government medical colleges, do you think, are we better prepared if at all there is a third wave in next few months or even a few years from now, other respiratory illnesses we may come across? Do you think India is better prepared to handle respiratory illnesses, crises arising from these sort of diseases in a better way with the infrastructure we have now? Thank you.
I think so. I mean, unfortunately, one of the impetus that this pandemic has really done is in the health sector as far as infrastructure is concerned. And many hospitals were either relying on oxygen cylinders or on liquid oxygen, and that had to come from the manufacturers, and sometimes that took time. And especially in rural India, sometimes it could cause problems. Now with PSA plants, which are generating oxygen in the hospital itself, and it has really helped in developing self-sustaining centers where you can have oxygen without having to rely on cylinders or liquid oxygen. Storage facilities have been created in large cities so that there is enough backup, not only for the third wave, but for the future, so that we don't have an issue of as far as oxygen shortage is concerned. The government has actually put in a lot of effort, because remember, oxygen was something which was initially at an individual hospital level. If we needed oxygen, the government was not involved. We directly talked to the manufacturers who were making oxygen, had an MOU with them, and they would supply oxygen depending on our need, or on a daily basis or twice or thrice a week, depending upon the storage capacity. Now with the government also actively involved, a lot of facilities have been created in terms of oxygen banks, in terms of PSA plants, in terms of liquid oxygen storage tanks, so that not only do hospitals have the facility, there is a backup which is available, and that has been also looked at a regional level. Because in India, a lot of oxygen manufacturing, as far as liquid oxygen, was being done in Eastern India. There was very few manufacturing plants in Central or Western India, and therefore oxygen would come from East India, where it was being manufactured, all the way to Central or Northern India. Now with these focus being on setting up plants in these areas, I think this will go a long way in the future also, being for us to really handle the situation of oxygen need.
Many thanks once again, Dr. Guleria, for patiently answering all our questions and in depth. We certainly feel that our knowledge has been enhanced on COVID-19 related to vaccination, treatment, as well as oxygen supply in India. So with that, I would pass it on to Krishna.
Thank you, Varun. Dr. Guleria, if you don't mind, I have one unrelated question by a participant, Antonia. So her question is, she is in the UK, and the question is, can medical students abroad gain experiences in healthcare provision in countries with a large population like India? And are there doctors they can contact or a recommended organization they can reach out to?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, we have at our institute itself a large number of people who come for elective postings or for an observership to India from not only from the UK or the US, but even from Australia. And they come and spend a few weeks here. They write to various hospitals, the registrar or the dean of that institute or the director, and then with formal permission can come and join and spend some time, attend the round, attend the bedsides, and also the teaching activities depending on which semester they are in. And we encourage that because it helps us to get an insight of how teaching is done in their institute. And I still remember many years ago, we had a lady who came from Harvard Medical School, and she was so fascinated by the crowds in our hospital and the type of patients that she saw that she said, I'd probably never have seen such patients in my lifetime. And she was very grateful for having spent time at the institute, because there are times in an OPD where you have to see almost 200 patients in a day, which is very challenging. So I think there is a lot of learning if people come to countries like India or Southeast Asia, because we see a lot of tropical diseases which they don't see. We also have different strategies because of the patient load, and there is a lot of learning which helps in making people better physicians. So I would say that if you're keen, you should write to various hospitals, and a lot of doctors who are of Indian origin and have relatives in India actually do come and spend a few weeks, because they meet up with their family and friends, and at the same time are able to spend time in the hospital. So this is something we encourage, and we would be very happy to support this in whatever way we can.
Thank you. And to close, I would like to thank you very much, Dr. Guleria, for taking out your time today to be with us. And it was an excellent and very informative session, I must say, with you today, answering all our questions and clearing the doubts and misinformation which has been surrounding COVID-19. And I would like to thank all of the participants who have joined today, and all of the participants who sent us questions. And to name some of them are Shreya, Manas, Tina, Kunika, Tanish, Anita, Sunita, Aggie, Seema, Irfan, Antonia, Kanika. And I would like to request all of the participants that please spread the knowledge that what we have received today, make people around you aware, and try to spread the information, whatever we have received today, and clear the misinformation. And I would like to thank the entire committee of Cambridge University Bharati Society for their efforts, and especially to Varun for his extreme efforts in making the questions and trying to do the session. So please follow the society, and we have a Facebook page, Cambridge University Bharati Society page, which you can follow. And if you have any questions, you can contact me or Varun about the society. And Dr. Guleria, thank you again. And we would like to, in future, once the situation settles, we would like to have you in person in the UK and in Cambridge University as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you. My pleasure.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And I'll close the session.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye. Good evening.